Authenticity is the catalyst for trust. We can't trust others well if we don't trust ourselves. I know I'm authentic. Then I know I can trust myself. I confidently walk into a room, and that is the foundation for me to be able to build a relationship with someone else. And that means that I can have the hard conversations. I can explorative, innovative conversations. I can do things outside of the box because I feel safe. I do believe that without authenticity, we leave performance on the table because we do not have a high level of trust.
Hilary, I'm very grateful and excited to have you on the Core Impact podcast. First of all, congratulations on your book. What is your intention behind writing the book, and what do you want people who read it to get from it?
Wow. Omar, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here because I see you out there being of purpose on purpose with all of your podcasts. And that's really what the authenticity key is all about. My book. It is about helping people claim their words, be able to really define who they are, and then set their compass, that moral compass, that internal guide that tells you, apart from what the world might be telling you, what the right is for you, what your direction is, and then blaze their trails. So, how do they create impact in the world? And in my experience, I was just seeing so many people, including myself, that were having a lack of confidence due to what the world was telling them versus what
Mm,
their heart was telling them. And I think the first step is for us to really reflect so that we can connect and have impact in bigger, better ways.
mm. Hilary, I'd like to ask you, how did you find your inner compass first? And then how do you help others find theirs?
That's such a great question. I mean, I think the hardest part of finding your inner compass, there's two things. Number one, you have to be quiet. You have to get quiet.
Mm,
And in a world that oftentimes has us moving so fast and rewarding those who are busy, it is really hard to take those moments of peace and reflection. And so part of it is trial and error and getting curious. So putting time on your calendar to think about your week and say, hey, where did I feel good this week? Where didn't I? What can I do better? What was calling to me? What wasn't? And you really do have to be a student of your own life in order to start to uncover. There's also a whole series in the book. There's chapters dedicated to doing the research and asking other people what they see in you,
mm,
and it comes back to this core, which is I'm a master facilitator for a project called the Virtues Project. And it was started in the early 90s as a way to connect humans and for us to see the best in ourselves. And there's a list of words that I use, that the Virtues Project uses, that helps us to identify the fact that we all have love, we all have courage, we all have the capacity for idealism and justice. But it's a matter of becoming students and living those things on purpose with purpose.
mm. Hilary, now I'm gonna come to the courage and idealism. There is one question before I'd like to ask you. When you help people find their inner compass and, for example, the purpose, I'm curious, how do you connect the three P's? Like helping people to know their purpose and following it on a daily basis in business, and something that they are passionate about also, and also connecting this with sustainable profit. Like how do you help people to find something they know that's their purpose, their calling, they are passionate about, and they can get profit from it?
I actually think until people get clear on who they are, it's very difficult to find those three Ps.
Mm,
And so oftentimes people are when they're struggling and they don't know what their purpose is, it's oftentimes they'll go, I don't know why, but I don't feel comfortable at this workplace. And then we'll start to talk about it and they'll say, oh, there's an integrity gap and it's
mm,
rubbing up against my core values. It's very difficult until you get clear foundationally to have those three Ps. But
mm,
once you're clear, once you have that moral guide, that moral compass that helps you and you listen to that voice, you have that obedience to self, you start to hear things and you go, aha, this is the thing that lights me up. So, one of the fun activities that I love to have people do, really what you're talking about is tied to a concept, Japanese concept called Ikigai. And so, Ikigai is, I oftentimes will have people keep a journal that says, because again, it's all this reflection. And in the journal, what are the things that I love doing?
mm,
The things that I love doing and I'm good at doing, because sometimes you can be good at something, but it's not something you love. So look at that. And then how can those things serve the world in a way that also can create profit as well?
mm,
So
mm,
leaning to those things. But I think we don't get curious in our own lives very often. We get onto the people that I see struggling the most are usually people that have been put on or have somehow accidentally been put on this pathway, and they're like, wait, how did I get here? So I think until you step back and you become a student of your own life, it's
mm.
very difficult to find those three things. I don't know. What do you think?
Me, it's actually this is the question that I find the most challenging, and I cannot tell you that I have like a final answer to it. But it always starts with the first two P's, and naturally will lead the third one. So when you once you start what you are saying, like giving yourself a space, and could be many ways, meditating, for example, journaling, spending time in nature, or doing any creative activities with this intention to discover yourself and who you are. This is the first and most important thing. At the same time, on the long term, it has to come with profit. Otherwise, it will not be sustainable.
No, I love that you said that because I think that the sustainability part, no, Omar, don't you think there are a lot of people who have been raised to believe that there's something innately evil about money? And so,
Mm,
almost as if those two things can't coexist, purpose and money. And I see this a lot actually in people who are very altruistic and idealistic, and they think, well, you can't be doing something good for the world and making money. And my challenge back is actually, no, you can, because when we feel safe, taken care of, roof over our head, building the roof over our head, when we have food, all of those things, that allows me to give more and give more back and make sure that the changes that I'm making aren't a flash in the pan, but are sustainable. So I do think that there is this pivot that's happening. I actually see it in the new generation of
mm,
entrepreneurs where they're not just entrepreneurs, they're even intrapreneurs within their own companies. They're really looking for ways to make sustainable change and differences, but still take care of self and still take care of family. And I think that
mm.
there's actually a great book out there called Love and Work by Marcus Buckingham. And I think it has some great ideas and tips and ways to be able to uncover some of these things. And it's again, it's life can be really hard sometimes, and it can be really, really fun when we get curious and we aren't afraid of taking big risks.
Since you're talking now about taking big risks, I'm gonna start directly with this question. So you wrote under my key, first of all, courage, then idealism, service, and joy. And I have one question about each of them. So
Yeah.
starting from courage, what's the most courageous thing you've done in your career, and how did it shape your career?
Oh, in my career. So, it's going to be interesting. Probably the most courageous thing was actually putting my book out, to be
Mm,
honest, because it was very scary.
mm,
But I will say, so that's kind of an easy answer. It's very vulnerable to put out your heart, your soul, your work and say, okay, everyone, here you go. Here's a peek. But I will say, I actually think in 2019, I did something athletic. I did the rim to rim which is from the South Rim to the North Rim. We can do it either way in the Grand Canyon. And I hiked it in a day. And I'm normally afraid of heights. Well, I was
mm,
afraid of heights. And I trained. And I think that the courage that it took for me to conquer that fear and to physically push myself really changed something inside of me. And I will say, I feel less, it doesn't feel like courage as much anymore in my business because I feel like I've done such hard things
mm,
that the rest is easy. Does that make
mm,
sense?
mm, mm. Yeah, I think sometimes when you expand your comfort zone, it everything is connected, right? Um, Sometimes we talk about like different aspects of life as if they were separate, like relationship, career, I don't know, family, etc. But they are in the end, they all relate to each other in a way. So you did something physically for your body, but it helps you in other ways.
I absolutely agree. I think that that's sometimes where we as humans get lost, where we don't realize how connected. Everyone will ask me when I ask them to define who they are, be like, "Well, at work or at home or in my community?" And I'll say, "Yes." They're like, "What? What do you mean?" I'm like, "Yes, all of those places. You are who you are, who you are." You how kindness shows up in those different areas may look different, but the fact that there is kindness should be the same. And so it is really an interesting thing. I think we're still getting back to the understanding of the ancients, which is everything really is tied together.
Mm. So the second one was idealism, right? And he said, I don't just believe that the world can be different, I act to make it so. My question here is how do you find the balance between driving change without falling into the helper syndrome?
Well, I don't see myself ever. I know this is a fine difference and fine line, but I don't see myself as a helper. I see myself as a guide.
Mm,
And it's a subtle difference, but words are so important. So the hero of the story is always who I'm working with. And so
mm,
become too much of the helper and the fixer, I steal their teachable moments. I take the lessons that they have and I make them about me. So my job is really to hone in on what the questions are they need to be asked, the ways that they need to be maybe guided so that they can achieve and do the thing. And if I'm doing it for them, then I've failed and
mm,
I've made it me. So it
mm.
actually is not as hard. I would say it was hard, but when I finally realized it's very natural to want to help, be the helper, be the fixer. But I realized that I then was getting the accolades. I then was getting the lessons, and I was stealing those hard, difficult, resilient, wonderful, awful moments from people that they need.
I like this what you said, Hilary. I'm not a helper, I am a guide. And the third one was service. And you mentioned here, I translate complex ideas into clear, actionable insights that drive transformation. And here I'm curious to hear a story from you. How how do you drive change to real transformation?
Well, I would say the very first time that throughout time, we all try to be of service, but I would say from what started me on my path here to where I am now was a family tragedy. I mean, we had, well, I'm going to call it a near tragedy. It was very, very hard and traumatic, a family trauma. And so I do tell about this in the book, and it was in 2003. Three things in a row happened. I was told I was going to die in childbirth. Obviously, I didn't. I'm here. My second that I was pregnant with at the time was born early and had to be rushed away to be in NICU. He's great. Everything's fine. But then the third thing that happened was my oldest son, who was 18 months old, two weeks later, ended up being burned very severely, and he was in the ICU for a month. And so what I realized is I went into kind of a dark place. I lost track of who I was because, as mom, I don't know if you're a parent, Omar, but as parents, as a mother, I had one job in my mind, which was to keep my kids safe, and I'd failed. So if I wasn't like, who was I then? How was I going to move forward? And I kind of started going through the motions of life. I was taking care of everybody, but I was inside. I didn't. I felt horrible. I felt awful about who I was. And this is when I really discovered the Virtues Project and when I discovered who I was. And this is when I actually had a friend. I always felt better when I talked to her and I didn't know why. And she said, it's this Virtue Project thing. And so I went to a training on it, and people there started saying things to me like, when you show up, I can feel how much you love people. I was like, oh, it was like I trust you because I trust that your intentions are really good. And as they were saying these things to me, I realized that I myself did not believe them about myself. I needed to be called to them myself. And I was getting in the way. So I started wondering if I could help others see who they were at a heart level, how could that create change in the world? And so two things happened simultaneously. One, in order to I don't know how everybody else is, but when I struggle, my natural tendency is to retreat. I want to go back, but that doesn't serve the world. So it became a battle cry and a challenge for me when hard things happen. And this was a hard thing. What I did instead for my son who was burned is I reached out to the people that were working in burn units, the people that were firefighters, and the people who were in the fire and life safety world. And I said, how can we prevent this? How can we help? What can we do? And my first books were children's books on safety that I
Mhm.
created. And it was a give back. And then at the same time, I started educating those people on how to bring out the best in themselves because I knew the stronger they were, the more they were helping their communities. And that's how my business 20 years ago really started. So it's turning those hard moments into how can I use this and turn it into a gift, an insight, and inspiration that can serve the world.
While you are listening to the Core Impact podcast, please take a moment to pause and share with me. How do you feel? Are you enjoying the conversation, feeling inspired, or something else? I would love to know your feelings in the comments.
Mhm. I like in your signature, you talk about the inspiration. You say live inspired, right? Or be inspired.
That's right. Live inspired.
Live inspired.
We have a choice. I mean, we have a choice. It's many people, I think, are walking around, Omar, as victims in the world.
Mm,
And when I say that, I don't mean victims. There are true victims, things that horrible things happen. We saw horrible things happen this week. But what I mean is people that are just waiting, ready, and expecting bad things to happen to them
mm,
instead of receiving the things around them as information and using them and turning them to good.
mm. The fourth one was joy. This is the fourth key, right? So you said joy is not just an emotion, it's an experience, a state of being. What does that mean in real life and work, especially under pressure?
Oh, I love that so much. You know, I run into people all the time who want to be joyful and they start their day by watching the news and complaining about this and all of these things. And if we think about ourselves as a vessel, and if you want to be joyful, you can't pour joy out if you have no joy within.
Mm,
And so joy is a state of being. It is a state of, I don't look at it as happy. I look at joy as a deep belief and trust that we will find the best, that we are in a peaceful state of confidence, that things will work out for us. And maybe it's going to look a little bit different. But if we trust that and we trust the universe, God, whatever it might be out there, if we trust that, then we can be in this state. I really am a huge believer. There's a beautiful book called The Book of Joy, where Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama have a series of conversations about joy
mm,
and these pillars. And listening to it's even more fun because then you get to hear their voices. But it is such a beautiful, it's about forgiveness, which is a state of being. It is about making sure that we show up in love, in compassion, compassion, not empathy. That's a huge difference
mm,
too, because there's such a difference between those two things. Empathy is a lot of people feel others' pain, but then they stay in it. And
Mm,
compassion is seeing the pain and acting in a way that helps to bring some sort of service, purpose, relief. So I think that to me, joy is, I find ways to fill myself with joy so I can pour out joy. Every time I present, I'm so goofy, Omar. I go into these big companies like Amgen and I will dress up like Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, or I'll dress up like Morpheus from The Matrix because we need to remember that playful, loving, joyful side of us that we had as children that somehow
mm,
we think we're supposed to grow out of.
mm, mm. I like it, and you reminded me with these two examples of my previous guest, Michael. He was talking also about the difference between compassion and empathy,
Mm,
and he was saying that empathy is the way to compassion. And he said also there are studies that show that when we think about empathy, usually we only empathic to people who are like us.
mhm.
So like us, like different, or say, let's say same country, or usually same, sometimes gender, or anything I feel close to. And compassion, when you have compassion and you live in a compassionate way, then you have compassion for everyone.
I love that. There's an expression too. It actually lights up two different parts of the brain. So and so I like to hear empathy is you're with someone, but sometimes when you're with someone in tragedy, it shuts down your brain.
Mm,
Uh, then compassion is another part of the brain. So empathy, I'm with you, but then move quickly to compassion, which means I'm for you. And it's
mm,
the difference between if a rock is rolling over on you, Omar, do I crawl under the rock and let it roll over both of us? Or do I say, ooh, I see you. There's a rock about to roll on you. Come over here.
mm, I like this example. Where do you see the clearest link between authenticity and measurable performance?
There is, well, I think there's an old book that's called The Speed of Trust by Steve Covey, and authenticity is the catalyst for trust. So without you being authentic, first of all, we can't trust others well if we don't trust ourselves.
Mm,
Authenticity, when I know I'm authentic, then I know I can trust myself. I confidently walk into a room. And that is the foundation for me to be able to build a relationship with someone else. And that means that I can have the hard conversations. I
mm,
can have explorative, innovative conversations. I can do things outside of the box because I feel safe. So I do believe that without authenticity, we leave performance on the table because we do not have a high level of trust.
mm. And also, how I understand it is part of it when I'm authentic and I trust myself, then I know if I go and have this conversation that's difficult conversation, I know if the other person is not ready to have this difficult conversation, I don't have a problem with that. So it's better for me to know to sometimes not be too confrontational, but like when there's something important to talk about it, instead I was just trying to fit in, right?
That is so true, and that's actually there's a whole section in my book that I talk about a technique. We call it listening to empower, but it's actually taken from the art of companioning from the Virtues Project and modified. But it is where trying to force a conversation with someone who's not ready for it is unsafe.
Mm,
So you're absolutely right. It's asking the question, it's opening the door for them. And then if they decide not to walk through, then it is what it is. You wait for another opportunity, you may have to change your plan, it may be that you can't work together, but forcing people to walk through a door they're not ready to walk through is never the basis of trust.
mm. Hillary, what are the top 1 to 3 misconceptions that people have about authenticity?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked that. One of the ones that makes me I actually tell a story about this in the book. I delivered this this keynote on authenticity, and I was cornered afterwards because I actually contend that you decide to be authentic because if you, when I know who I am, when I define who I am, it is not, the world doesn't have its way with me and change me. I don't just become this thing that is wishy-washy, right? So there's a decision and a choice there. So I had someone come up to me afterwards and say, "That is not right. If you choose, then that's not authentic." So how, and his whole thing was, if I show up in a bad mood, then I'm authentically in a bad mood. And I said, "No, no. Authentically, you are a good human who doesn't want to hurt others. For control the things around you that you can so that you don't dump out yuck on other people." So I think the fact that however you are is how you are, however you feel is how you feel. And again, I contend that sometimes we have saboteurs or other things that get in the way of the truth of who we are. And so that discernment is really important. So that's one.
Mm,
Two is that you get to be a jerk because it's authentic and it's how you feel. Um, you know, there's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive.
mm,
And so I hear people and they're like, "That's just how I feel. Take it or leave it." No, you're being a jerk. Like being authentic and really true to, unless that's one of your moral compass things. I mean, I suppose you could be your moral compass, but it's really about not using excuses. What's an excuse? And that's really important. And then so number one is that it's not a choice, it is. Number two is not to use it authenticity as an excuse. And I think number three, another misconception, I see it all the time when you look at our algorithms on social media. If you ask me what I think is one of our biggest destructions in the world right now, it's the algorithms, it's the vacuums that we are creating around ourselves
mm,
where we're right. So if we have a belief in something authentically, now the only people I listen to are the people who believe like I believe. The
mm,
only thing that I do is the thing that is like, and I I could not disagree with that more. And we see that more and more where people are becoming so entrenched in misconceptions or their beliefs, and they're not looking at the other person and being curious and understanding context and experience and differences. So I think authenticity should not be an excuse to only listen to voices that are the same as yours.
mm. Hilary, you talk about also burnout, and there are some studies show that 27% of employees are at high risk of burnout, and there are many other studies that show even higher numbers in different aspects. So, why do you think is that happening? It's almost at least 1 out of 4 people have this high risk of burnout.
I think there's so many reasons, and every individual is very different. I do think that the noise of the world is the biggest. I mean, I could give you this could be its own. We could probably talk for hours
Uh-huh.
about this. I think there are so many different reasons, but I do believe that context switching, that noise we get from the rest of the world, when we let the external become louder than the internal voice that we have,
Mm,
then we have to do this and we have to do this and we have to change that, and we become exhausted. And it's, there's a concept when you're doing time management called context switching. And context switching is there's a degree of labor that happens when you switch from, let's say, phone calls to emails to posting to all those things. And your brain takes a while to flip into those different areas. And that time is very taxing on you. I think we have an entire world that is context switching all the time. And there's so much noise coming in that we don't have our recovery time. And I actually think that this is again a much larger conversation. Bruce Feiler is coming out with a new book in May. He's the author of Life is in the Transitions, and his new book is about ritual. And I have really been pondering this a lot lately. I think we have our cortisol levels are so high. We jump from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, this context switching, but we
mm,
don't close the loop. We don't have the rituals that help us say, okay, we're safe now. This is done now. This is complete. And those rituals just help the cortisol levels to come down so that we don't feel so burnt out. And I think that we have to get back to rituals, some of these quiet moments, some of these
Mm.
times of recovery. We expect too much out of ourselves.
Is there any mistake that you made, either in your career or in general, as you were saying, like story that you have that also gave you something that you still have until now and gave you the wisdom?
Gosh, daily. I mean, there's the big stories and the little stories. I would say before I really became a student of authenticity, I held on to things a lot more. And now I see them as when mistakes happen, and I mean, I'm human. I make mistakes every day. I apologize. I learn from it and I move forward. I take what I need and then I become better because of it. And that was a huge, that's that growth mindset. Carol Dweck
Mm,
talks about mindset. And when I learned to switch from fixed to growth, that I'm not done, that I get to forgive myself and forgive
mm,
others. The day I die, I hope I'm still becoming a better person than I was the day before. So authenticity is that piece where I know where to go back to. My moral compass, I know where to go back to, but it also reveals to me when I'm off. But again, there's the comfort of, oh, I know what I need to do to get back in line. And if I'm not back in line, it's not done yet.
mm, mm. Hilary, now I would like to ask you a question about the future, because AI is changing everything, right? And from your view, what are the top three human skills that becoming more important in the future with the existence of AI and technology in general?
That is such a great question. I think Brené Brown has been talking a lot about this lately too, where you look at the fact that you have, we changed from where they needed muscle. The Industrial Revolution changed that, and we went from brawn to brain. And now we have AI taking over some of that brain piece of things. And so what is left is heart. And so I think our top skills, I'm going to say forgiveness
Oh,
is
okay.
going to be a huge one because I do think that when I talk to people, that is the number one thing that they struggle with. And sometimes
Mm,
forgiving others, sometimes it's forgiving self. And sometimes when you don't forgive yourself, you don't forgive others. It's kind of this big thing. And we have too much pain walking around this world. I mean, it's funny when I work with, so I guess this would be the second one is trust. When I work with companies on trust, I always tell them, and they think it's so weird. Okay, great. We've talked about what trust looks like for us. Now, what are we going to do when someone breaks trust? And they're like, why would we talk about that? I'm like, because it's inevitable. We're
mm,
people, we're
mm,
humans. So, how are we going to commit ourselves to repairing trust when it's broken and make space for that instead of being unforgiving, which creates this really difficult spot? And then I do think it's love. I don't care what that love looks like within the aspect of business. I just think that we have got to love ourselves and love one another in a much more powerful way. They say this is Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. He says feedback, business feedback only comes in a really powerful way when there are three things present. And where those things overlap in that Venn diagram, that's the gold. And it is number one, are you credible? Do you know what you're talking about? Number two, familiar with me. Do you know who I am? Otherwise, I'm not going to listen to you. And the last, do I genuinely believe that you care about me? Because if I don't think
mm,
about me, I'm not gonna believe a word you say. So that
mm,
whether it's caring, love, like, I don't care what you call it. If love is too ooky, I like the word love, but we have got to care about one another. We have to. We just have to.
mm, mm. Hilary, I mean, we can talk about the three: forgiveness, trust, and love, a lot. But like one thing that came to my mind when you're talking about forgiveness, I'm reflecting how many of my friends or ex-colleagues that when I ask them how do they find their job now, for example, when they are, some of them were hired like recently, a few months ago, and I find this in common that they directly compare with the previous employer or employer 3 years ago or 5 years ago, and it's a lot about, I feel like they haven't forgiven the previous employer, so they always want to prove that they are now satisfied or they are happy because they found something better, and there kind of resentment still inside, right? So yeah, that's
Yeah.
why I
And that,
liked what you said about forgiveness.
well, you're gonna leave things on the table then. That's that book that I was sharing, the Book of Joy. The Dalai Lama says that there's three different areas of forgiveness. There's one, it wasn't a big deal, you let it go. There's two, it was a big deal, but you give reparation, you give a way back. Or three is, I forgive you, not because you necessarily deserve it, but because I deserve to not hold the pain that is going to
Mhm,
impact my life moving forward.
mhm. And is there like the each of these levels? Is there like a category, or it doesn't matter anyone you choose?
Yeah, I mean, it really, for each person, it's going to look different. It really is. And what's interesting is I was teaching that book one day. I secret. I know I accidentally have said several books throughout this. I was a literature major when and I taught English. That's how I started. I taught English literature. And so I love books. Words and books and writing are just it's like the warm, cuddly, awesome place for me to live. So you'll hear me mentioning books, and I actually do a lot of book clubs with people. So when I was teaching the Book of Joy, somebody said, wow, this forgiveness thing, I realize when I'm holding on to something and I haven't let it go, it's not because I haven't forgiven them, but it's actually I haven't forgiven myself for what I wish I would have said, I wish I would have done. And so I do think it comes back to this, when we take moments to reflect and say, what did I learn from this experience? What will I do differently next time? That's when we can truly be free. Otherwise, it's owning us.
Mm, mm. Is there anything else you would like to talk about forgiveness before we move to the next question?
I think so. Only the fact that I do. I mean, we should do a whole podcast sometime on forgiveness. I do think it's really important. I just think that the wounding that we have in society is why we have so much violence.
Mm,
And when you talk to people about their number one virtue that is the hardest for them to access, it is almost always forgiveness. And so that speaks volumes to me about where we have healing to do.
mm. When you see people struggling at their work, at their role where they are working, how do you help them to step back? Because sometimes very small things makes us very anxious. Sometimes we give so much attention to things that they don't really matter. So how do you help people to look at the big picture and step back and reflect?
Every person's different. So
Mm,
it really starts with curiosity and a conversation. But I will tell you that the majority of the time, it starts by, first of all, honing in on their morning routine and their evening routine.
mm,
Because when you think about how you start your day, if you start it crazy, oh, we're running, we're doing this, when you start it like that, I will say that that is the number one biggest change in my life that completely revolutionized everything for me, was determining my non-negotiables in the morning. I hated getting up early in the morning, but when I started getting up early in the morning to read and to
mm,
reflect and to have a cup of coffee and to look out the window and to go for a walk, those things put me in a different place to be able to bring a different sense to my world. And I think that that's the same thing for going back to that moral. How do you want to show up? Well, you can't pour out of yourself something you haven't filled up with. So, what is your morning routine that sustains and brings that up and helps you to fill up that way? What is your evening routine that allows you to go to sleep in a way that does that? And then along the way, one of my big things, I mean, this is again, there's so many answers to this question, but I would say one of the other big tips I give people is never schedule things back to back.
Mm,
Always have 5 minutes at least in between. And in that 5 minutes, say to yourself, how do I want to leave this person feeling when I go
mm,
on here?
mm,
What do I need to do to be in that state of mind? Because who we are isn't just what we do. It is also, Omar, I hope that you leave this conversation feeling uplifted and better for having had the conversation. And if I haven't done that, then I haven't done my job. And
mm,
so, I do really think there's a phrase that we use in camping, leave the campsite better than you find it. I truly believe if we left one another better than we found one another, and if we prepared ourselves to be able to be that way. I've canceled meetings, Omar. I've canceled meetings before where I've said, you know what? I am in a place right now that I don't want to bring this energy to you. Can we please reschedule? Because I
mm,
have the responsibility to show up with the care and keeping of ourselves, our energy, and the people that we're entrusted with.
mm. I'm curious, do you have like a morning routine when you have, I don't know, 30 minutes, 1 hour or more when you do one, two, three things in a structured way, or you keep it like more creative, let's say?
It's fairly structured. I will tell you that I am going to, and it's about an hour, but I will tell you, I have been realizing that I need to revamp it for this new year. I'll spend time in reflection until
Mm,
the new thinking about how do I want to show up this year? How might I have to change things in order to in order to be able to do that? So I don't know what it will look like yet, but I'm due for a change.
Hilary, there is a question from my previous guest, and this is something that I do by the end of the podcast. I started doing it recently, and I really liked it. So I asked the guest, and I will ask you afterwards to ask me a question that another guest will answer in the future. So my previous guest, Nora Wilhelm, asked me to ask you, what is your vision for the future if you connect everything you're working on? If all of that came true, tell us the story of that future world. What does it look like? What is the vision you hold in your heart of hearts?
So there's an interesting question somebody asked me once, which is, what is the shape of your life? And it's one that came from Bruce Feiler. And I feel like it answers your question really well. I didn't say it was a line or an up and down or anything. I said it's a flashlight. And I see my life as a flashlight, and my heart is this battery, right? And this is why I need to have it charged right. And then the light starts to shine. And what happens is everybody else, these particles, these beautiful particles out there, is as we connect, then the light continues to spread out more and more. And what happens is darkness gets pushed out more and more. And so the vision of the future that I have is where we have people who are filled with light, filled with hope, talking to one another, excited about differences and learning and curious versus afraid of them. And I know that that's way out there, but I just believe if we start these pockets, that we can continue to grow and have this ripple effect of this love, this trust, this kindness, this warmth, this glow. That's my wish.
I heard that 144,000 people in the whole world. How many billions do we have? Only 144,000 are enough to change the whole world if they have the same intention in any aspect.
I love that. I think that that is so beautiful. Let's make it
Yeah.
happen.
So, Hilary, now it's your question. What would you like me to ask? What are you curious about that you'd like me to ask future guests?
What is it in your life that is worth living for. Not dying for, but living for.
Mm. Okay, I will do that. I will let you know when I get the answer. So I'm very grateful, Hilary, for this conversation with you. We talked about so many exciting topics. We talked about authenticity at the core. We talked about how to be curious. What is it like to be joyful, to live a joyful living? The talked about context switching, for example, in this era. We talked about AI, the human skills. What does compassion mean? Forgiveness, and many other things. So I'm very grateful for the conversation and inspired also. The last thing, it's not a question. I would like to leave with you any final thoughts or call to action for the listeners you'd like to share.
Thank you, Omar. I just want to thank you for being such a kind and gentle spirit. And the fact that you are putting your light out into the world is something that brings me hope. I think the final thought I have for your listeners is thank you. Thank you for considering some of the things that we're talking about. Continue to be curious, continue to show up in kindness and love, continue to explore what it means to forgive yourself and others, because together we can be that 144,000 people that make a difference in the world.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Hilary. And I'm going to use the sentence or the word I usually say. Live inspired. I'm going to think about it too.
Thank you. Live inspired. I appreciate you.
Congratulations for listening until the end. You are in the top 25% of listeners. Studies show that we forget up to 70% of what we hear within 24 hours. But when we repeat an insight by sharing it with someone, commenting, or journaling it, it moves into long-term memory. So now tell me, what are your 1 to 3 takeaways you're keeping from this conversation? Enjoy every moment. Until next time.